Good day, Dragon Slayers. I am honored today to have again as my partner my cousin, brilliant cousin, uh, Michael Dallen. Michael has written a wonderful book, The Rainbow Covenant. Uh, and I'd like us to hear from Michael in his own words what happened in his life journey that compelled him or inspired him to write this book. And as an aside, in part of my life, I spent time as an editor. And I have to acknowledge that, Michael, you are one of the more gifted writers I've come across. And it's of interest that we share the same bloodlines. I hope that portends some positive opportunities for me if I share the same genetic legacy. So, how did you get here?
Well, I've got your book. I've been reading through it, and we've gotten past the University of Michigan mostly, So, yeah, you're a stylist too. Oh, well, we're lumpy with talent, us Bitkers. Let's just face it. Uh, how did I get there? I started off as an atheist. I went through Hebrew school as a kid, a conservative movement Hebrew school. Uh, and it's funny. My mother would silently say a prayer, hamotzi, on having a meal. She had grown up with our people in Wyandotte, Michigan, and they had cheder. She went with our cousin Aaron. Um, Later, Harold would go, and she was a girl, and she went, but she was gifted with Hebrew, and she learned what they learned, and um, but they were kind of ashamed about their Judaism. That generation, that's the World War II fighting generation, grew up thinking that it was something fusty and of the old country. Um, she would. It was just a few years before 10 years before she died or so, before I knew that she would silently say a blessing before eating um, the hamotzi, which isn't, precisely the correct blessing, but it's a blessing. It's a bracha to invoke, um, invoke consciousness of God. Um, but I never knew that. I didn't know, and um, my Hebrew training and up to my bar mitzvah at the age of 12 and then 13 was very pro forma. They just wanted you to know how to read, just enough to be able to do your bar mitzvah. We had a few gifted teachers, a lot of Holocaust survivors. One Israeli teacher who'd been a machine gunner in the War of Independence, and some others who were pretty serious about things. Um, but the school was called upon to just teach us very superficially. I remember they called me out. They found out that I was hiding from classes just before my bar mitzvah, and the assistant principal is interviewing me with my mother, because I was a troublemaker to regard.
And hence he became an attorney.
There's a lot more trouble ahead, but that was just at 12, and the I had a bar mitzvah coming up, and you have to read for that, and he was just shocked that I had actually read my portion in English, that I knew what I was going to be saying, because that was so unusual, because hardly anybody bothered to, they just, all they wanted you to do was parrot the words without understanding it. That was, he was just shocked, that, and as it turned out, I had the sexiest um, prophetic portion, the Haftorah that you say along with the Torah portion that you read for your bar mitzvah in the Bible, the story of Gomer, you know, the prophet had married Hosea had married a woman of loose affections, a zonah, a prostitute, and and she had run out on him. And the message of it was that if the prophet could love his straying errant wife, that the king of the universe could love his straying errant people, Israel. And it was very deep, very powerful, very sexy. At that age, at 12 or so, you're just, you're still going through the dictionary, looking for dirty words, and this was something else, that he would strip her naked and send her off with her lovers, and it was really something. And I would have missed it if I hadn't read it, but I left all that behind. I thought it was all just wishful nonsense, that the belief in God was just wishful nonsense. Um, I personally began to believe in the King of the Universe and the mission to Israel when I was about 19. And I read a wonderful piece that I talk about in that book, Moses, the First Revolutionary. In the 70s, we were all hot for revolution. And Moses, this Viennese Catholic psychiatrist, had written this up. And it was the first time I'd seen the Bible discussed as as a work worthy of consideration. He went through the words instead of just trying to, learn to read the words um, for appearance's sake. It was an actual examination of the contents of the stories of Exodus. I remember what grabbed me. He was talking about Moses, the first revolutionary. That Moses looked, according to the text, Moses looked this way and that way, and smote the Egyptian and buried him in the sand. It was a premeditated murder, and I it, my hair stood up on the back of my neck. It was just something that this guy is taking the the Exodus script and treating it seriously. And and then I realized, and his argument was that Moses was this revolutionary. You'd read his piece, and you saw that that the Exodus was a paradigm for all later revolutions. That he brought in Mao with the way his father treated him, and Castro and the way his father treated him, and the psychological perspective of these great revolutionaries. Tommy, you would love it as a psychiatrist, because this is another psychiatrist reaching out to you from Vienna. Uh,
Well, it's of interest that right around the same time you were reading that book, uh, I was exposed to Freud's book, Moses and Monotheism.
oh yes, well, and
Yeah,
that's where I read about Moses and monotheism,
yeah.
and I mean he flagged that for me, and I read that too. Um, Freud's analysis is not as sharp as Victor Dames. This is
Mhm.
the writer that I'm talking about. You would love it. So I hope you get a hold of it.
I need to read your book first, then I'll consider. That was it. So, did you say you became a believer at age 19? Or did you believe passionately in the idea of Israel at age 19?
He was talking about Israel being a people that love freedom more than anything. That the words of Exodus echoed in our ears, and this was repeated at the Seder table every year for young and old alike. And he was saying that a people who undergo this kind of training this kind of indoctrination must love freedom more than anything. And he was saying that this is part of the reason that the Jews are who they are in the world, a fiercely freedom-loving people. And he was talking about there are legendary elements in the Torah, but that's when I first began to read it and read it seriously. And I thought most of the world of Torah was just hocus pocus and wishfulness. But then I read more, and and the world comes down to whether or not you think that the world created accidentally. Is there a God, or was it created? Was it? Do we have a purposeful creator behind all existence, behind all reality? And the arguments are a lot better for, I think, that it was created rather than everything came about. All that we see and do and live, the entire cosmos is just an accident. But finally, there's the Jews, and that's like God's thumb on the scale of whether we believe or not, because you can't look at the story of the Jewish people, including all the prophecies about who Abraham's descendants would be, whether or not the nations will bless themselves by Abraham's offspring or not. You have confirmation again and again of realized prophecy, that is, like I say, it's the thumb on the scale.
It appears, though,
Mm-hmm.
that for you, you were transformed. You had an experience of awe, and coincident to that, you began to follow a path that brought you closer and closer to your purpose and closer to God. What's of interest to me is that when I talk to you, and as I've gotten to know you over time, you are a passionate person who is principled and adheres rigorously to a path that you believe in. And that has actually given you health and inspiration and charisma and very special qualities, which to me reflects a very successful transformation, and also reflects, if you had a binary choice, would you rather live this life of consciousness and dedication, or would you rather consider your life merely an accident? And in your case, you decided purpose is a far better choice.
Well, I had a teacher, a literary teacher before Victor Dame, and that would be George Orwell, a passionate pursuer of truth, an English writer who gave us works like 1984, his most famous work. Um, and my passion was truth. The son of a librarian, an English teacher, whose mantra to me was "Look it up." And but my goal all along has been to pursue truth, wherever it takes you. And when I came upon the Dame book, and that there was merit, there was value in this Torah. This is something. This is from a Gentile. This is from a Catholic. Um, instructing me in the value of the heritage of Israel, which is how the world works. I mean, it's ironic, and you wouldn't believe this stuff. That's the magic of God's cosmos.
It's of interest that one of the most popular history of the Jews was written by Paul Johnson, also a Gentile.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's a crazy world. I mean, you have a lot of believers and a lot of unbelievers, and you can pick up something from pretty much anybody. You never know. Um, But Orwell's pursuit of truth was what motivated me as much as anything, other than my mom, look it up. And I mean, obviously, you become a Torah person. You know, and as I read it, I got more and more confirmation. Occasionally, you come across something that is just completely crazy, and like Kabbalah and the mysticism that adheres like a barnacle to all these different movements. But um, I remember I read through the world's great scriptures, what I could of them. Sometimes they were, extremely repulsive, um, and it came as a shock to me that Hebrew scripture was head and shoulders different and better and more compelling to me. Um,
For you, what was it? What was that point? How did you see that? What distinguished Hebrew?
Nietzsche was talking about this, and he was comparing the world's scriptures, and he came to the same kind of conclusion that in the Torah, the holy book of the Jews, there are men and events so great that there is nothing in Indian or Greek uh, writing to compare to them. And he called it the book of, Nietzsche is associated with atheism and skepticism, but he was a big believer in what he called the book of righteousness. That is to say, he also said that to take um, this the old what they call the Old Testament and glom it onto the Christian scripture, and to take the two of them together and glom it together is the worst crime that literary Europe has on its consciousness. That this completely different book, so rococo in taste, he said, compared to the Book of Righteousness. It really is a standout kind of work, very, very different from the other.
Let me take this in a little different direction. If you follow the message of the Rainbow Covenant, which I'd like to give you a chance to touch on now, for me, it almost looks like a template from which a great civilization may arise.
Precisely, precisely. That's exactly right. It's a framework for righteousness. The seven commandments are the whole covenant is a framework for righteousness for everybody, whatever you believe, even if you believe in Cthulhu, uh, or you're a Confucius or Buddhist or Christian or Muslim. Um, there is this way that it is capable of accommodating, invites uh, everyone to follow these universal moral laws.
Well, I no doubt, don't doubt that in addition to all of this, you very likely, as an attorney, are a constitutional scholar as well. Do you have any sense of how these principles ultimately informed those that drafted the Constitution and the Declaration?
Well, I don't know that they were aware of the specific seven commandments. It's so obscure, and it's been barnacled up with baloney and obfuscation. I was talking to a federal judge not long ago. He's a very religious Jew, um, uh, just outside services not long ago, and he was asking me about the seven commandments and how they would affect the rules of courts. The founding fathers and the creators of American law, and the creators of English law, um, and well, Western European, Rousseau and the others were very, very informed by Torah, by Walter Gropius and the rest of the founders of the international legal principles were were scholars of Old Testament law. But Gropius, had an affirmative knowledge of the Seven Commandments, of the concept of the Seven Commandments. Well, let me just say about the Seven Commandments. They all follow logically. They're not intuitively, you're not going to come out with them just intuitively, just based on the one principle, but they're all based on the principle that God made man in his image. That is to say, that the individual human being is a sacred being, that we, as the Declaration of Independence says, we're all imbued with these natural God-given rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Um, all of the Seven Commandments follow from that. These are the rules that every civilization needs to, is like an enabling act of that principle. If you don't have these principles, then you're not going to be treating the individual human being as he should be treated, and he won't know his rights.
So, what are the Seven Commandments in the covenant?
Well, one of the problems with them is that they're not all that easily just spouted out. I mean, I'll give them to you straight. There's a law against the first law, or however you want to list them. There's a law against idolatry, but that's how it's put. But really, it's a law against savage worship, against doing the kinds of things in an act of worship that no God worth worshiping would ever countenance, like murdering people for the glory of your deity. It's actually a law against what we call avodah zarah, or strange worship. There's another law.
So, the first law.
First or last. In the book, I treat it last.
Well, but that coincides with the first commandment. I am the Lord thy God, there shall be no other gods before thee.
They're completely different codes of law. The Ten Commandments are for Israel, a priestly people, and the laws are given in details. The Ten Commandments are an outline, basically, of the 613 commandments of the Torah, which is an extraordinarily detailed book of statutes. The Seven Commandments are, very general categories of law that are to be filled in by human initiative, rather than by, strict adherence to the letter of the law. It's completely different that way. Let me tell you about one of my favorite law in some ways, and that is the law. It's amazing. The Seven Commandments are something like 17 syllables. And in 17 syllables, not too many words, you have a complete schedule of righteousness, a complete guide to all law, if you can do it. But dinim, which means laws. And the thrust of that is that every human society is obligated to set up a system of police and courts and punishment and laws so that people know. Living in a state of nature is not going to realize human aspirations or release potential. You have to have police and laws and courts and adjudication. It's actually a law against anarchy. It's a law against oppression by any means, but particularly by anarchy. So dinim, that's one of the laws. There's a law against murder, which the laws against murder and thievery really are very, very like the same, pretty much, as the Ten Commandments laws, except they're given only in general terms. There's a famous law that's associated with the seven, and that's the law against eating a torn limb, ever menchachai, limb torn from a living animal. In other words, kill your food before you eat it, which to me is fascinating. I associate it with the green of the rainbow, um, and it's actually an environmental, ecological commandment that to remind us that that animals have feelings. Do not cruelly mistreat your animals. Don't hurt them unnecessarily. And that and the news, by the way, that the King of the universe himself cares about the feelings of animals. This is completely different from what the New Testament says. Paul goes on, is it possible that God cares for cattle? And Torah teaches, yes, he does. Um, so and a human being is obligated to treat animals that we eat um, with without cruelty and with a decent respect for who we are, who and what we are. Don't eat disgustingly.
So one of the anchors of kosher beef is a compassionate death for that particular animal.
One of the yeah, all the animals that we eat must be killed mercifully without pain to the extent possible. And indeed, kosher slaughter is painless. I quote Temple Grandin in there, the great animal uh, uh, researcher and autistic lady who wrote a wonderful book that's also worth reading, Seeing in Pictures, um, but who affirms that kosher slaughter should be absolutely painless. Um, and um, And in fact, one of the things I love about the Seven Commandments is it gives you another dimension to the laws of kashrus, of kosher slaughter. And you see, what you think is just a bunch of ridiculous hooey becomes part of a larger scheme of respect for the animals that we eat and respect for the human beings who eat them, that they should eat them, with like the elect of creation and not just as another animal. So, and the same with the stricture. You see from this the stricture against eating meat and milk together, and where that comes from. That it is um, any Gentiles are permitted to do this, to eat meat and milk together. Cheeseburger is not a violation of the fundamental laws that sustain civilization. The Jews are forbidden to do this because Jews are supposed to be a priestly elect people, and it is not an act of great um, righteousness to slap the milk that's a very symbol of a mother's love together with the dead flesh of her calf. You have to ask, we're given dominion. The seven laws teach us, and Torah teaches us that we've got dominion, and this is part of a universal revelation. Um, that, but we don't need the glory of taking the mother's milk together with the dead, the cub's dead flesh and devouring them together. We should be certain enough of our place in the world without that. Um, I should say that what we're dealing with is the seven laws is a universal revelation initially that man is made in the image of God. Genesis makes it very clear that this is part of that all humanity is called upon um, to recognize that we all exist in the image of God and that mankind has dominion over the earth. That's universal. And then, in Torah, the whole world is called upon to read Genesis, to learn what there is in the book of Genesis. Torah is for the Jews. The specific commandments that given at Sinai are a whole other thing. but what's in Genesis is for everybody. And in Genesis, you have the news right away that we're all made in the image, and that man is given dominion over the earth. That we have a responsibility as stewards over the planet. So that's what we have with dinim. We have a law against murder, and that's interesting to define because some people say that it forbids abortion. It doesn't. It's a whole other thing. We have a law against sexual sins, and again, and what the law tries to prohibit and get human society to prohibit, it calls all humanity to come together to ban these terrible acts of oppression. So acts of sexual oppression, of rape, are prohibited, and it's incumbent upon all human societies to do what we can to ban it. Oppressive homosexuality, what the Spartans did with kids, what we would call statutory rape, a male or female, it is banned. Adultery, taking woman or man, well, in this context, it's women, and violating the bonds of matrimony, whether or not people have formal marriage ceremonies or not. And then there's a law against, we call it the law against blasphemy, or in the Hebrew, the original Hebrew is against blessing the name of God, really cursing the name of God. And that would be doing something like murdering people for the glory of Allah. Again, it's like idolatry, doing something that no God worth countenancing, no God worth worshiping would ever countenance. It's very closely related to the law against idolatry. But the idea is that you're bringing the very idea of religion into disrepute.
So,
Following.
Michael,
Mhm.
as you personally pursued this path, and now it's been a good 50 years, correct?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
I've been on one is on a journey,
Mhm.
I've been on a path.
How has that changed you?
Why? I don't know. I don't know. I didn't take another path. This is the only path
Well, I
I
mean, no,
know.
let me, has it changed any of your beliefs along the way?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was a 19-year-old kid. I'd already broken up with my first love. Let's see, yeah, that had gone to hell by then. Uh, but um, I mean, I came out of a pretty good, same background that you did, pretty much. My mother was a lot easier to take than yours, I think. No,
That's
no,
why that's why I became a psychiatrist, and
yeah,
you
right, yeah, and mine compared to Aunt Seal was a day at the beach. Um, but uh, I became, yeah, I mean, I became a religious man. I remember, I don't know if you remember my Uncle Howard. I was very fond of him. This builder, very, man's man kind of guy. And I remember not that long ago, he was almost at death's door, and we're talking, and he was saying that my turn to religion was something that he never saw coming. He just, like, whoa, where the hell did that come from? And, um, but, and really it's just going back to what our forefathers, what I know your grandfather fervently believed. I was hearing from our cousin, in San Francisco, going on about Martha Leviat was going on about your grandfather, my great grandfather, as basically a yeshiva kid in his old age, you know, spending all his time praying and studying Torah, you know, but that's where we started out. That's who we are. We're Lithuanian, very pious Lithuanian Jews, um, about whom Einstein was saying that with the Jews in the modern world, it's like the Jews had spent 2,000 years studying for modernity, you know, and suddenly, boom, the energies are released into the world, and the next thing you know, you have Google and Oracle and Facebook, and Hollywood and rock and roll. Don't forget and Gershwin, and it goes on and on. Of course, yeah. I mean, you got to cover all the bases. Uh, um, Lou Gehrig, or not Lou Gehrig, Hank Greenberg. We can't claim Gehrig. We can claim Bob Dylan, you know. But this is a force in the world, and then you realize who the Jews are. This tiny people. We're designed to be a very tiny people. It's really easy to lose Jews. Um, we go off, we're successful, we assimilate. The next thing um, we have people who don't have Hebrew names anymore, and they go off, and there's kind of a penumbra around the people of Israel. Those who are attracted, those who come in, those who are nearby. Um, but if you don't have Torah and as the Torah says, we are a people only by virtue of our Torah. If you don't have that Torah core, you soon lose the people, and the population of Jews plummets. We see happening in our time. People finding different things. Other Jews turning to, in previous generations, to Masonry or Christian Science. That picked up a lot of crazy Jewish ladies who were looking for health. Buddhism now. I was in Angkor Wat not long ago, a year or so ago, in Cambodia, and they've turned a Hindu temple complex into a Buddhist temple complex, which it never was. And some of the people coming there to parade and become monks were Jewish people who who had never heard of the Seven Laws, and didn't know anything about kashrus, and they fade out. So that happens in every generation. So the Jewish people, even besides all the persecution, the pogroms, are designed to be the fewest of all peoples. It's just a very small cadre among the human race that's responsible for a not the lion's share maybe, but a very, very great amount of creativity and progress.
Well, it is apparent that you have a lot of pride in our faith, and you have lived a life that, as an independent observer would say, comes close to righteousness. Uh, and I think, as an attorney, this book is almost written like a brief.
Oh, I hope it's better than that.
No,
And
no,
yet,
no, but I mean, it's an argument for righteousness.
it is.
Yeah,
Oh, it
and
is. This is a better way.
right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, righteousness beats evil. It really
So,
does.
what I would like to do at some point, I hope we can do it soon, is to continue this exploration, because you're a very wise person, and I'm sure that you can inspire others. I'm very interested in the process of awe and how that has the capacity to transform mankind. And by your story, I think awe has struck you a number of times in your life. And I think it's very much faith driven, which gives you a platform for sending a message to many of us. And I'm sure you have.
Wait until my next newsletter. I heard from an associate, a Bulgarian Gentile, a goy, or Noahide, who is a passionate student of Torah, and in Bulgaria yet. You know, you never know where you're going to get your acolytes and your teachers and your leaders. And he was going on about the Hebrew concept. I put this in the upcoming newsletter. We have a newsletter called Covenant Connection.
So for our audience, to access that newsletter, you would go Covenant Connection.
Well, maybe you could go to our website, 1ST Covenant. That'll take you there. First Covenant.
First Covenant, okay. And then we can get on the list and access your newsletter.
Absolutely, yeah. But he was talking about bitachon, which is a very important Torah word, meaning usually translated as faith. And he was explaining. He came up through Christianity. That it's not this kind of Christian faith where you swallow all doubt, where you just bull ahead with passive dependence on some concept from on high, but you have the idea that bitachon, that things could not be otherwise. That of course there's a master of the universe, a sovereign of the universe, and of course he's worked like this, and of course, obviously, he's given us just laws rather than lead us, to founder in the mud. Um, so bitachon is a part of our operating system, and and the prayers we have and the religion that we have is designed. I remember my mom going on about how boring they were. You repeat the same prayers again and again and again and again, and but the idea to feed is to go over. It's a kind of self hypnosis to underline how you're supposed to feel about things. It gives you a path, an emotional path to take, where you express your love for the author of our religion, um, and that does inspire awe. And then when you go out and you see the natural world, a blade of grass, you know, a lover's smile, whatever there is, you do feel awe, and also with bitachon, gratitude for being here, for the way that he's arranged it, for realizing that really the world could not be otherwise. So you never know what you're going to learn from all sources, including from some guy in Bulgaria all of a sudden teaching you a really advanced Torah concept that I've never heard from anyone else.
Sounds wonderful. Michael, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with us and dealing with the challenges of technology in order to get here.
Uh,
But it has been a delight and honor, and I encourage our audience to get out there and connect with First Covenant so that you will have a few more disciples
okay.
following you.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to learn from them. Yeah,
Okay.
each one is a repository of infinite value.
Well, I look forward to you joining us again. It's been an absolute delight, and I'm really proud of you, kid. You really have achieved a great deal in your life.
Thanks so much, Tom.
I for the audience benefit, when I last saw Michael was probably, well, our reunion was one time, but when I left Michigan, you were about a 13-year-old boy. I think you were right on the threshold of your bar mitzvah, in fact.
I think I'm to your age as you were to our beloved Jimmy. 13,
Yeah,
14 years.
yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Be well, brother. Thank you.
Thanks so much.